Nintendo's Super Famicom. Well, we're all set up and ready to play a bit of Street Fighter 2 on the Super Famicom. Now, I'm sure most of you will agree that these kind of games are best played on an arcade stick. And there are arcade sticks available for the Super Nintendo, but I'm going to stick with the standard Super Nintendo 6-button controller because this thing's what I always used when I played the game as a kid. So I want to keep this experience authentic. Street Fighter 2 is considered by many to be the most important one-on-one beat-em-up of its generation, if not of all time. It's not the first in the franchise, but it definitely set the template for all of the Street Fighter games that followed. It might seem quite simple by today's standards, but what it gave us back in 1991 was really quite groundbreaking. It was the first of the fighting games to give us combos, and also it gave us a huge playable roster in comparison to previous fighters. As the game begins, you get to choose one of 8 entrants into the World Warrior Championship. 2 of the contenders have returned from the original Street Fighter and make up a quarter of the selectable characters. Both karate masters, Ryu and Ken, hail from Japan and the US respectively. In the original game, Ryu was the main character, and although his styling has changed significantly, his white gi remains. Ken was only playable as a second player, but if you beat your opponent who was using Ryu, you could continue with Ken for the rest of the tournament. This time around, Ken is playable at any point, but aside from cosmetic differences, he's essentially the same character as Ryu. Not that that's a terrible thing, but as the series progressed, they were tweaked and refined to give each subtle differences in their fighting styles. The other 6 playable characters were distinct in both style and technique. Chun-Li, a kung fu expert from China, and Guile, a United States Air Force major, are probably the most conventional of them. The game also has 2 wrestlers, E Honda, a sumo from Japan, and Zangief, a mountain of a man from the former USSR, both of whom brought the title a heavy-hitting, close-range grappling element. Rounding out the group are 2 of the game's most unusual and memorable characters. Dalsim, the stretchy, fire-breathing yoga from India, and Blanca, the electrifying swamp beast from Brazil. All of the characters are capable of delivering punches and kicks of varying strength thanks to the 6-button control method that was brought over from the original Street Fighter. There are 3 punch buttons and 3 kicks, and these are graded light, medium and heavy. Light attacks are the fastest and weakest, and conversely, the heavy attacks are the slowest and strongest. Punches and kicks were obviously commonplace in other beat-em-up games of the era, and we occasionally saw headbutts, elbows and knees, but it was the special moves where Street Fighter 2 really brought its A-game. Each character has at least 2 special moves which are executed through various combinations of D-pad and button presses. But they mostly fall into 3 categories. Those that require multiple direction inputs followed by one of the attack buttons, like Ryu and Ken's Hadouken fireball attack. And then there are those that require holding in one direction for 2 seconds, then quickly in the opposite plus an attack button, like Guile's flash kick. And thirdly, there are those that require the mashing of one or multiple attack buttons, like Blanca's Electric Thunder. Other moves, although not considered special, are the grappling moves that allow you to throw or smash your opponent into the floor. They're executed by pushing towards your opponent and, when in close proximity, hitting any of the medium or heavy attack buttons. Now, these moves are considered pretty cheap because they can't be blocked, but when landed, they are pretty satisfying and pretty humiliating for your opponent to endure. The joy and skill in Street Fighter not only comes from having quick reflexes, but from knowing the range, the timings, and the effectiveness of each of the character's moves. But no attack is really effective without a good defense. And all of the characters are equally capable of blocking high and low attacks. Standard attacks can be completely blocked, preventing any energy from being drained. But special attacks will cause at least a little pain for your opponent, no matter how effective their defensive stance is. It can seem, upon first playing Street Fighter 2, that your only challenge is to choose a character, fly around the globe, and defeat the other 7 playable characters. That is, until you hand the last of those 7 characters his arse, and quickly you realise that there are another 3 challenges that require your attention. This is the part of the game where you get stuck in to the non-playable characters. The bosses, if you like. And they're all encountered in the same order, with the heavyweight boxer Balrog being the first up to get slapped. He can be found hanging out on the Vegas Strip, looking to unleash his devastating array of punches. He's the only player in the game without any kick attacks. Their buttons are used to deliver yet more powerful punches. Although his attacks are very powerful, he's actually one of the easiest to defeat in the game due to his lack of kicks and long-range attacks. Next up is the Spanish narcissist by the name of Vega, who can be found hanging out in a caged arena somewhere in his homeland. I usually find this agile, mask-wearing, claw-wielding pretty boy to be one of the most difficult characters to defeat in the game. He's fast with a long reach, his flying kicks are impervious to uppercuts, and he's very difficult to attack in the air thanks to his double jump. And when you finally manage to crack that mask off his face, it's on to Thailand to face Sagat, who's back for a rematch after being defeated by Ryu at the end of the first Street Fighter. This time, he comes sporting a big fat brown scar like a turd of shame across his chest thanks to Ryu's infamous Dragon Punch. But he's returned this time with his own Dragon Punch clone, named the Tiger Uppercut. It's quite devastating if it connects, but otherwise leaves him open and vulnerable due to the length of time he's suspended like a giant punching bag in the air. After clocking up his second thrashing in as many tournaments, you could be forgiven for thinking that it's all over. It's time to stand on that podium, collect your winner's medal, and crack open that bottle of champagne. But you'd be wrong. And it might come as a bit of a surprise to you, as it did to me the first time I saw someone get to this stage in the arcade. Because there's one more opponent. And this is a guy who'd quite happily mash your spine into pulp. The curiously named M. Bison. In fact, that wasn't his original name. In the Japanese version, he's called Vega. And so the one we know as Vega was actually called Balrog. And our Balrog was called M. Bison. And that's where the problem laid. The African-American boxer in the game bears more than a passing resemblance to former world heavyweight champion Mike Tyson. Fearing legal proceedings, Capcom decided to switch the names to the ones that we're now familiar with here in the West. Now, I never would have considered that M. Bison's name, the Western M. Bison's name, was anything other than intentional. His jacket and belt resembled that of a bison's head. I was actually quite surprised the first time I saw the Japanese version and realised that the graphics were exactly the same, but the name was different. Now, am I imagining this resemblance, or did the artist foresee the future and, realising that the names were going to be swapped, draw his character in that way? Who knows? I mean, you let me know what you think. M. Bison always proved to be a formidable final opponent in the World Warrior tournament. His ability to unleash a number of devastating moves, most famously his Psycho Crusher, and his solid range of standard attacks, made him a foe to be reckoned with. With his defeat came a unique ending for whichever of the 8 playable characters you beat him with. These each gave a bit of insight into their backstories. The Super Nintendo version of Street Fighter II felt very close to arcade perfect at the time of its release. As you can see from these 2 screens side by side here, there's not much to set them apart. The arcade is slightly higher resolution. A couple of the less important attacking moves were omitted from the SNES version, and we've also lost a few frames of animation on the home edition. So much of the original has been included that it's easy to forgive the changes when you consider what they'd managed to squeeze into a humble 16 megabit cartridge. I feel that nothing has really been lost in its translation to the Super Nintendo. That feel and the arcade experience has been faithfully recreated, and the game has been brought to the SNES in all its glory. Now, in the 90s, the early 90s that is, there were a few changes to the game, a few updated versions that were released that allowed us to experience more of Street Fighter. Firstly, adding that feature that all of us really wanted, and that was to be able to control the 4 Grand Masters. A notable update reached arcade and home systems in '93 and '94 respectively. That one introduced 4 more characters to the roster. The first Street Fighter II game was an amazingly well-crafted fighter. It blazed a trail through arcades and home systems, leaving a path for other fighters to follow. And many of those games still have active franchises to this day. I mean, Capcom are still making Street Fighter games and other games using the Street Fighter characters. As much as I've enjoyed playing Street Fighter 4, I still come back to this original Street Fighter 2 on the Super Nintendo. It's got so many happy memories attached to it. And I'm sure it's a game that I will continue to come back to for many years to come. Well, thank you very much for joining me on this, another trip into one of my happiest of gaming memories. If there is by a slim chance 1 or maybe 2 of you out there that have never played this game, I hope I've shown you why I think it's such a fantastic title, and hopefully that'll inspire you to at least go and check it out and try it for yourself. Those of you that have played it, I'd love to hear your Street Fighter memories. So let me know about your feelings on, well, the SNES version, the Famicom version, the arcade version. I want to hear your Street Fighter 2 memories. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed making it. And from my living room to wherever you are, this is Simon signing off. Bye bye.